Hey everybody, my name is Beth King and I am the College of Applied Science and Technology's Retention Specialist. And I wanted to jump on and create some helpful scholarship resources for you all to take advantage of at any time that's accessible to you. So today's small or short workshop is going to go over letters of recommendation. Overview of what we'll be covering today, why you might need a letter of recommendation, who you should ask, what you should include within your request to the letter writer, any what ifs that might come up, because those are always helpful to go over. We will have some writing exercises embedded in this where you can kind of just pause the video quickly and kind of practice some of those skills. What makes a strong letter of recommendation, the timing of how far you should ask in advance, and then following up on your requests, and then we'll wrap it up with getting started on your request if you can, and then contact information for any questions you might have moving forward. So the why would you need a letter of recommendation? And I mean, this is something that comes into everybody's mind as they're scrolling through scholarships that are available at the moment. I am the person who's compiling those awesome scholarships that are available to you as CAS students, and quite a few have had requirements for letters of recommendation. So I wanted to make sure you all have the information and the skills to be competitive applicants for those specific types of scholarships. So a letter of recommendation can serve a couple of purposes. They are vouching for specific skills or experience that the scholarship may be requesting. They could be addressing overall accomplishments and strengths. Why I think this is a great way to look at it is we're not always good at boasting about ourselves, right? We want to be humble. We want to like keep it to ourselves, all the amazing, great things we've done and accomplished. So your letter writer can do that, right? They can brag about you, all the amazing things and all the great work you've put in. And in that way, the scholarship committee can make the best decision. So the third reason third way a letter of recommendation will be incorporated into scholarship is demonstrating your investment to a particular organization or institution. So if it's a very specific support organization or community organization, they're going to want to know, how are you investing in us? How would you be kind of connected with us and investing in our work in the future? I think this piece also fits very nicely with what graduate programs may be looking for, right? Like, how are you going to use this education long term and persist with this graduate program? I will say this workshop in particular is just going to focus on scholarship letters of recommendation, but in the future, I will make sure to make a workshop, an on-demand workshop, so you can kind of address, how do I tackle these grad school applications as well? Common mistakes when it comes to letters of recommendation: asking just any instructor or former supervisor or manager you had. It definitely matters who you ask, and we'll get into that more as we move through this workshop. Leaving out specifics or kind of just glazing over things. It's important to be as specific as possible, to have your letter writer be as specific as possible, so that way the committee can understand the full picture, because they don't know you as well as your letter writer does. Requesting the letter of recommendation last minute, sometimes that can't always be helped. Sometimes there's a scholarship that popped up that you weren't aware about, and you can't let it pass you by. So you're going to just shoot your shot and ask the letter writer to kind of try to meet that quick deadline. But requesting far out in advance as possible is most helpful for you and the writer. But we'll get into that more. And then passing on scholarships that require a letter of recommendation. Don't do that. Like it takes some preparation, some time and investment on your part, and also like your mentors and connections part, but it's definitely worth it. I would also say scholarships that have maybe a lot of requirements or specific requirements like that, they might have smaller applicant pools. And so you might be more likely to actually win that scholarship because other people are passing up on the letter of recommendation piece. So good tip, right? All right, so who to ask? What I'm going to have you do is just pause your video right now and just jot down as many people as you can, at the very least, maybe 2 or 3. If you had to ask somebody right now, who do you have in mind? So pause the video and take that. All right, so I hope that exercise was really helpful. I kind of feel like Dora the Explorer doing that, but I think it's good, that way you can kind of get on this and chip away at this process as we work through this workshop. So does their role matter? And in this, you'll kind of see both answers if you look up tips on how to request letters of recommendation. A fancy title isn't always going to be the strongest letter. However, if it's somebody that's very important in the field, somebody who can demonstrate why you're such a strong candidate because of the role and relationship they have with you, that definitely is going to help. I would also say, in terms of whether or not their role matters, asking like a family relative, just like a close friend who really can't speak to your professional performance or academic performance is not going to be a strong way to go. Ultimately, letters of recommendation are supposed to be this kind of objective evidence and documentation of why you'd be a worthy choice. And so asking a friend or family member is not a good idea. But there's quite a few people I've run into, especially while they're working towards their associate's or bachelor's degree. They might not have met a whole lot of faculty members yet. They haven't really started gaining experience in the specific field that they're actually studying in. And so you can get flexible. If you have a great relationship with your boss and that employment really doesn't have anything to do with what you're studying, seek out the transferable skills from that job that can apply to this scholarship and how you're going to apply it to your education. It's all connected in one way or another. Timeliness, time management, organization, dedication, perseverance. Those are just some kind of broad transferable skills that you'll find in many different fields. And so does their role matter is a little bit of a complicated one. If you're ever kind of unsure about whether or not someone would be a good choice, you can always reach out to trusted mentors you have who would be familiar with this, your academic advisor, and anyone from the Career Center as well would be a great source if you're just unsure. So what other information about your relationship might matter? You really need to evaluate your connection with that person. Just because they were your supervisor or manager doesn't necessarily mean that that is a positive relationship all the time. Even if you did fairly well at that job, they might not have had the closest connection with you or been able to kind of top of mind pull out some great examples about why you're a very skilled choice. And so I know when I've served on scholarship committees in the past, there were some folks or some letters I reviewed from supervisors of students who wrote just very mediocre to even negative letters at times, mention things about being on their cell phone at work, or, they were an okay employee, but that's all I really have to say. So really take stock of how well you know that person and how well that person knows you. And then decide, okay, is this somebody I want to move forward with and kind of entrust with this this duty of helping you try to go for an opportunity related to your education. How does this connection relate to the scholarship you're applying for? So I talked about that. Sometimes you do have to get creative. It's not always just seamless where it's somebody in the field already that you're looking to get into, or in the field that's sponsoring the scholarship. Sometimes you just need to say or think about, what did I learn or execute at that job? How does this person know my character? And then how does this apply to the specific scholarship requirements that they've outlined in the application? Again, if you're unsure about this, because you have to get creative. You know, there aren't really some obvious choices. Reach out to your academic advisor or the career center, or Life Lab, even better, to kind of see if they can talk it out with you and walk through like how to approach this. So the last piece I wanted to get in there, you know, what if I have a great instructor in mind? We have a great relationship, but I didn't get an A in their class. I probably shouldn't ask them. No, definitely ask them. You should. And this is something I learned even in my own research of how to tackle letters of recommendation. If it was a course that you did kind of run into some challenges, some obstacles, but you persevered, you learned and you reapplied new skills, and you ended up kind of bringing your grade back up, or kind of returning and re-entering this course in a different way and doing better the next time. I would say that's a great example that the scholarship committee would want to see. This person knows how to approach challenges, address them accordingly, work through them, and persevere. That's a great skill to have. Grit is something that takes a while to develop. And so I think it would be a great example and a unique example, truly. All right, so how do we request this? You know, like what goes in the request here? And so I'm going to have you pause the video again and just do a quick little practice. I want you to, before we even get into this, I want you to kind of jot down what you might put in a request to a letter writer. So pause the video right now and write that out. Okay, perfect. I hope that was helpful. Okay, so things you can include in your request. Or you should include in your request, definitely, right? Because we want to be specific and we want to give the letter writer as much helpful information as possible. So number one, a reintroduction of how you work together or learn together if needed. If this is somebody who, you know, you formed a great relationship with, but you just took their class, you know, last semester, so they definitely know you, you guys just were talking not that long ago, then a reintroduction isn't necessarily needed. You can just say, hey, it's me, you know, I was popping in, I'm really interested in the scholarship, and it's requesting a letter of recommendation. They're going to be aware of you and how they know you, right? For somebody who maybe you haven't worked with in a long while, they're still obviously going to remember you, but just kind of reacquaint them to how you work together or learn together. And that way they're kind of primed in the right mindset of like, oh, okay, yeah, like I remember them from my class. This is how they performed. It was very impressive. And so you're starting off on a good foot. The specific scholarship or fellowship opportunity. So it would be helpful to give them the link if there's a web page involved so they can kind of look it over, get familiarized themselves. If there's somebody that you know, they don't have a lot of time, so they need all the information up front, you can provide them like a quick little blurb of what the scholarship does, what they're looking for, and then how you might use it, even so, I don't know. Skills or experiences you feel would be good to highlight. So this is where you really do want to, you're helping them out, right? Because you've done a lot of great things, but the scholarship might be looking for something very specific. And so to kind of set it up for them saying, hey, you know I've done a wide array of things for you. However, this scholarship is looking for me to be working in STEM, to be taking full-time class load with math classes. And they're also looking for somebody who puts in time for community service. And so that way they know, oh, okay, yeah, I have some examples top of mind that would demonstrate that very easily of how I've seen that in your work and what you do. A specific deadline you would need the letter of recommendation sent in by. And so my advice to you on this, it depends on the letter writer. If this is somebody who is pretty prompt, they're, you know, that once you request something, you can expect it back by a specific time. It may be okay to say, hey, you know, the overall deadline for the scholarship is May 3rd. And so if I could have it before then, have it submitted before then, that would be great. If this is somebody who you know is like pretty busy, they have a lot on their plate, and maybe sometimes working with them or getting requests filled takes a little bit of time, then you might want to create your own deadline. So the deadline for the scholarship is May 3rd, but I would love it if you could submit the the letter of recommendation by April 21st. And so that way it gives you some time, it gives the letter writer a specific amount of time. Okay, this is where I'm going to put it in on my to-do list. And then it also gives you, I think, some wiggle room if you needed to come up with a backup for whatever reason. And we'll talk a little bit about backups as we move forward. Number 5, very important. That's why I underlined it. You need to have them follow the guidelines of how the scholarship overviews how the letter should be submitted. So having a letter sent directly to you in an email where you could read it and then you submit it to the scholarship is actually going to do harm to the competitiveness of your application. Again, letters of recommendation are kind of meant to be this objective resource of vouching for your skill set or character. And so they want to ensure that you haven't influenced the letter in any way. It's best to have the instructor, the boss, the mentor follow the guidelines. A lot of scholarships will have like a portal for those people to submit the letter in, so you never see it. The only thing you will see is whether or not it's been submitted and then the date and the time. So that way you can kind of monitor that. But just really make sure you do that. Try to not be involved as much. There might be some scholarships where they don't mind and they say letters can come directly from you, or they need to come from you, but in a sealed envelope. And so just try to find out and then follow those guidelines with that piece. And then, of course, if there's a helpful template online to build from, do that. I do suggest kind of zhuzhing it up and making it personal. Since this is kind of a personal request, I wouldn't copy and paste whatever template you found online. But I know through Indeed.com, they had a lot of great templates for a myriad of different variations of letters of recommendation. And so definitely use templates to kind of cut down on time if you need it. So continuing the what of how to request. Additional factors to consider: the tone of your request, considering your relationship with the letter writer, that kind of helps you decide your tone of how to ask for this. If you know each other very well, then maybe you can be a little bit less formal, more personable, and kind of upfront about things. But if you know them well enough to ask for a letter, but it's still a very professional, formal relationship, maybe they were like a primary investigator for a research project that you helped on, you'll want to make sure that you address it in a more formal, professional way. Just based off of taking stock of what your relationship is with this person. So the timing, of course, make sure you are requesting this as soon as possible, as far as in advance of that deadline. Writing an email to an instructor or boss being like, hey, oh my gosh, like I need this scholarship. Can you do this for me tomorrow? You're less likely to get an agreement because this is a request, right? They are able to say no for various reasons, whether or not they just don't feel they would be the best recommender, or they just might not have enough time to write you a good enough letter of recommendation. And so timing just does go into your request. Be conscientious about that. Again, if you need advice on that, you're just unsure, reach out to academic advisors or the Life Lab. So I would say include your resume or CV depending on what it is for and who it's for. It's just more helpful information for your letter writer to create the most accurate and representative letter. If your resume or CV doesn't necessarily outline the skills that you're wanting your recommender to overview, then leave it off. Don't include that. That might get confusing, and then they'll end up overviewing things that the scholarship committee wasn't very interested in or didn't find very applicable. So the letter writer may not be able to fulfill your request. And so, like I said, they might not have enough time. Something might come up. They might think that they're just not the best recommender for this specific opportunity. So have some backups in mind just in case. When we get to the timing piece, I'll talk about how you can kind of weave that in already so it doesn't come as a surprise. You can kind of just, okay, quickly revert to your timeline of asking your backup letter writer. Mentor advice, familiar. So sorry. So if you're unsure about, how to approach this, who to ask, definitely reach out to any mentors who are familiar with the specific opportunity or field. Sometimes there'll be somebody listed on the web page or PDF that's describing the scholarship who'll be like, if you have questions about applying, let us know. I'm sure you can reach out to them. They'd be more than happy to talk with you about what they're looking for, how to approach this. So a brainstorming session really quickly. So pause the video and write down at least 3 people you could ask for a letter of recommendation. I won't say this has to be right now. Maybe it's just at any time. These are people I trust. These are people I have great connections with. And these are people who would be able to write about my skill set and character. So I'll have you do that now. Pause. Excellent. I hope you had some folks. Every once in a while, I have students who just don't have anybody, and that's okay. Partner with somebody and brainstorm with somebody else. They will help you kind of get creative and kind of see, okay, no, I do have some connections. I just wasn't thinking about it that way. So what makes a strong letter of recommendation? Because by no means are they all equal. And I provided a great example over here. Jack is an adequate student, end of letter. And I have seen ones like that being on scholarship committees. And so you just want to keep that in mind. These are things that make a strong letter of recommendation. The length and recency of a professional connection. So if you knew somebody only for a couple of weeks, that might not be as strong as somebody you've known for months, right? Even years. Years might be really great. Definitely the recency of professional connection or academic connection. So asking your junior year high school teacher for a letter of recommendation when you're like me and you're an adult learner, you're in your 30s, that's probably not the best route to go. There are people you've worked with and interacted with more recently who would create a stronger letter of recommendation for you. Relevance to the scholarship field or opportunity can definitely help. Again, it doesn't always have to be that way because sometimes you just don't have specific people or multiple people who are very relevant to the opportunity. But it definitely would help if they can speak to that, because they're somewhat of an expert in relation to that, right? So they're saying, hey, my expert knowledge vouches for this person, that they'd be an excellent choice, go for it. So title at times, if there's somebody with a higher up title, a title that's related to what the scholarship is asking for, definitely can be helpful. Doesn't always have to be that way. But again, do remember to avoid asking friends or family members to write your letter of recommendation. That would not be an example of a strong letter. Specific examples should be included in that letter. And essentially this person is writing the story, right? So if they just wanted a bullet point or bullet point list of the skills that you have that relate to the scholarship, they could read that off of your resume. And many scholarships will request that for you to upload your resume along with letters of recommendation. So your letter writer, tell the story. And a lot of them might already know this, and you can kind of check in on that or include that in your request email, the initial one, just saying, hey, I'm looking for you to write the story about these specific skills. This is what the scholarship is looking for. Do you feel comfortable doing that? And this is the deadline I would need that by. A positive and transferable representation. And so if you're getting a letter of recommendation from a previous job that is just not related to the type of scholarship that you're going for at all, that's okay. Find the transferable skills in there. So I think I already talked about this earlier, you know, time management, transferable skill from lots of different opportunities. Somebody who is able to and loves working with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, different from their own. Somebody who loves to be growth oriented and like seeks out opportunities all the time that, you know, to accomplish things they've never done before. These are all positive and transferable skills that, you know, don't really depend upon the title that you had at that time or the class that you were even taking. So good and not so good examples. I've already kind of touched on that a little bit. There will be times I've seen just horrible examples of letters where I think what always does concern me is, why did that letter writer agree to write that letter? They obviously don't look at the applicant in a positive light. Maybe even just a mediocre light, which isn't helpful for that opportunity. And so it's just important to take stock of that relationship, to ask in an appropriate way. But I think once you kind of know who your letter writer is, you don't need to worry about that they're going to write you a horrible letter of recommendation. I would say that's pretty rare that does happen. And I know if anyone ever does share it with you, or you're able to access your application later and see the letters of recommendation after a decision has been made, you know, sometimes it's very heartfelt to see how somebody else looks at you, to see, you know, they really, really believe in you and they see the great things you do every day. And so definitely that is probably more likely the case if you know your letter writer very well, right? So how best to ensure your recommender writes you a strong letter? Know your relationship, keep the timing in mind, you know, don't stress yourself out, don't stress them out by trying to do last minute requests. Every once in a while it might happen. I think if that does happen, if you're trying to apply for a scholarship with a really tight turnaround, I would only ask letter writers who you know really well. Then I would not ask somebody you have kind of just like a cordial, casual connection with, because yeah, it might not pan out to be such a strong letter. Providing helpful information, which we've already talked about those examples, giving them specifics, attaching your resume or CV if appropriate. Following those requested submission rules. Again, I'm always going to just reiterate that a couple times. Definitely follow those to a T of how the scholarship overviews that. Following up on your letter. So that's in two ways. One, just kind of making sure and checking in on the timeline of it being submitted, but also following up to thank your letter writer. You know, they've taken the time and to invest in you and to kind of write you this letter that might end up getting you an opportunity. So make sure you show your gratitude. It doesn't have to be anything over the top or anything. It can just be like a thank you email, an e-card, or a physical gift, or not a gift card, physical thank you card if you need. So it just depends on your relationship and what you're comfortable with. But I know most of the letter writers I have interacted with, if I was like, oh, I want to like get you a coffee card or take you out to coffee, they're like, no. You know, like, thank you for saying thank you. There's no need to kind of like financially reimburse anybody for that. Yeah. Okay, so when your timing of request, ideally it should be at least 3 to 4 weeks out from the deadline, either that you have set for yourself or the actual deadline for the scholarship. Online, when I was doing research about just some more specifics, it was like absolutely never do 2 weeks or less. I do kind of stand by that, but you know, sometimes there's exceptions. And so I think the piece of advice is just try your best not to do 2 weeks or less at all. Set a timeline for yourself. And this can be helped by using like Google Sheets, an Excel sheet, a calendar, like if you're just like having your Outlook calendar, just setting reminders on that, whatever works for you in terms of scheduling and time management, utilize that. Set it far out in advance, right? Okay, this is the day I'm going to send my requests via email. Depending on their agreement and depending on if they've submitted it, this is the day I'm going to follow up if they haven't submitted it by this date. If somebody pulls out, right, and they're not able to write it anymore, even though they agreed, this is a specific date I would ask a backup letter writer and still be able to meet the deadline for the scholarship. And so I put that, include backup timelines just in case. I really have never had to use a backup. Almost everybody follows through most of the time. It has happened one time with somebody. So take that stress off of your shoulders. Think about it in advance. You know, worst comes to worst, this is when I would reach out to backups. And then, of course, track and include on your calendar or Excel sheet when the scholarship is definitely due, right? Like the absolute deadline, everything needs to be in by this date, including my essay or my resume and these letters of recommendation. So what if your recommender directly sends you your letter of recommendation? Because I've been just reiterating time after time, make sure you follow those guidelines. You know, check and see what the web page says, what the PDF says about how to submit the letters of recommendation. If there's specifics, you can kind of reiterate that to your letter writer. Hey, would you mind submitting it this way? This is what the web page requests. You know, I don't want to be docked points or whatever for that. I think what's helpful, and I did include this on that slide, but you know, up front, include that information and instruction up front in your request, so that way they can reference it, because most people will, once they've put it together, they're going to say, okay, yeah, what did they say about how I'm supposed to submit this letter? And then they'll follow that instruction. Yeah, I don't think I've ever run into anybody who like refused to follow the guidelines of how to submit a letter of recommendation for a scholarship. If that comes up for some reason, I don't reach out to CAST. We can walk you through that and kind of brainstorm what we're going to do. But I think just providing your letter writer with that instruction up front and then reminding them if needed will definitely help. Okay, so following up. So I mentioned I do have an example where somebody they agreed to write my letter and they never did. And as I followed up, you know, I would follow up appropriately. I really didn't hear anything. And so what was good is one, had a backup I had a strong relationship with, and two, had asked far enough in advance that even though this backup, it was a little bit tighter of a timeline, it still all worked out. The backup letter writer was not that stressed out. I was still able to meet my deadline and everything was okay. So, it happens. That's why we're talking about it, so you can be prepared right now. And so you may need to follow up on your request. Okay. You may need to follow up on your request. It's totally appropriate to follow up 10 days before your deadline if you haven't heard anything and you kind of anticipated hearing something. So this can be helpful or helped by agreeing on a specific date in your initial request. Remember, sometimes you can set your own deadline just to ensure that way you know it'll definitely be in, even if something kind of goes off the rails and they submit it to you much later than anticipated. So there are helpful templates through Indeed Career Guide if you're feeling unsure about what to say. You know, depending on the person's role, it can be really nerve-wracking. The person who just kind of ghosted me, I guess, on my letter, you know, they were an esteemed faculty member, somebody who I had done research with. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so weird following up. I don't want to be rude. And so, you know, definitely be professional and polite in your request, but it is okay and appropriate to reach out and just say, hey, you know, just checking in. I wanted to make sure we're going okay. We're still sticking to the timeline. So I think the only other piece of advice I would have is, you know, don't get overzealous on reaching out. You know, like if they told you, oh yeah, I can get it to you in 4 weeks, and then you reach out like a week after you've requested it, like give them some time still. They probably will use the whole amount of time that you both agreed to. And so, it's just finding that balance in between when to ask. So does it really matter if they never submit your letter? Unfortunately, it does. Especially if it's somebody who, I don't know, like their title would be related and like speaking to the type of skills. It's not going to count you out necessarily. It would kind of make some committee members wonder, like, well, why did that person never submit their letter? Did the student didn't ask maybe appropriately, or they just put this person's name down, they never asked, or so, that's why it's important to have backups. So you could avoid this, avoid, not having a letter of recommendation when you needed it. And so don't feel worried about this part. We're just talking about it so you're prepared and it's not a surprise. But yeah, it's just something to consider. All right, so helpful practice. Pause this video right now and write yourself a letter of recommendation. Does not have to be long. It can just be like 1 page or, like 100 words or something like that. But it's good to kind of get in the practice of identifying the skills that you have. So that way, somebody else, when you're asking somebody else to write it about you, you're like, yeah, I know what I have to offer. I know what I bring to the table. So I'll have you pause now. Excellent. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you took advantage of that. Even if you didn't right now, I do suggest doing that at a later time. It's good to learn how to be able to identify and express your accomplishments and your skills. Where it's all about marketing yourself a lot of times, and you have a lot to offer. You have a ton to offer. So definitely practice that if you didn't do that right now. So support that's here at U of A. There is definitely more. And if you wanted to get into it, I'm sure we could get you connected to your academic advisor and you could say, well, what else is there out there at U of A? But a great couple places to start if you need some support in terms of applying to scholarships or securing letters of recommendation. One would be LifeLab. They do offer virtual support. So if you are one of our online students who's not even in the Tucson area or not even in Arizona, you are still able to access this awesome resource center. They are open Monday through Friday from 12 to 5 p.m. In terms of that virtual support, there's no appointment needed necessarily. You can drop it any time that they're open, and you can find like the Zoom link to do virtual drop-ins at their webpage that I listed on the screen there. They also have an email in case you wanted to reach out to them, email with some questions that way as well. So you can also make an appointment with your academic advisor. They're a great resource here with CAST. There I have our centralized email for advising, and then you can access the advising appointment portal through our webpage. I have included the link that you could kind of jot down there, but you can also get to it by just going to the CAST webpage, navigating to student services, and then the Meet Your Advisor tab, and you'll be good to go. So ready, set, go. I encourage you to write up at least one request of a letter of recommendation right now as we wrap this workshop up. Save it in your drafts. It's ready to go if you ever needed it or when you need it. You did a really great job today, just kind of listening and engaging. And I know everything is going to go really great for you, especially if you reach out to helpful resources and mentors. So if you have any questions moving forward, please feel free to email our centralized email, castadvising@arizona.edu. Again, my name is Bethany King, and I look forward to speaking with you in the future.